It's 4 o'clock, and so we'll go ahead and get started here today, and I'll call to order the January 11th, 2016 meeting of the Salina City Commission. We'll start with a roll call, please.
Mayor Blanchard.
Here.
Commissioner Crawford.
Here.
Commissioner Davis.
Here.
Commissioner Hardy.
Here.
Commissioner Ryan.
Here.
Great. At this time, I'd like to ask all who are here to, if you're able to, please stand and join in the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a couple of items on the agenda for awards and proclamations, so we'll move to that section right now with 3.1.
Item 3.1, the day of January 18th, 2016, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Commemoration Day in the city of Salina. Cash Hollister will read the proclamation.
Mr. Hollister. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Whereas the 18th day of January is the birthday anniversary of the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and whereas Dr. King stood before the entire world as a man of peace, champion of human dignity, and an example of love and brotherhood, and whereas the citizens of Salina do recognize Dr. King's contribution to the good of all humankind, and they do desire to perpetuate and implement the ideals expressed in his dream of peace and harmony among all the individuals. Whereas the citizens of Salina remember the dream of the beloved community is very much alive, and that everyone shares in the responsibility of creating a just society. We must continue to act on the legacy of Dr. King to ensure the civil rights of all individuals. Now, therefore, I, John Blanchard, Mayor of the City of Salina, do hereby proclaim the day of January 18th, 2016, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Commemoration Day, and urge that every citizen of Salina join me in extending recognition and honor to the memory of this great leader of humankind. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the City of Salina, Kansas, to be affixed this day, January 11th, 2016.
Great. Thank you very much. And I know there is a long laundry list of activities that will be taking place.
Indeed.
On that day and throughout the weekend. So if
yes.
you'd like to share some of those.
Yeah. Friday, we have a jazz concert as well as one mic open mic, which is a spoken word event. Galen Abdur Razak is the jazz flautist. He's doing a combination concert at the Smoky Hill Museum, which is free from 6 to 7 on Friday. And then one mic, which is teaming up with Salina Arts and Humanities for Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. That is at Ad Astra. I am hosting that. It is available for anyone 16 and up. It's $5 admission, and that is at 7 o'clock. Saturday is a potluck dinner at Christ Cathedral, or over there on, 8th Street. And that's at 6 o'clock. And then Sunday is the community-wide interfaith service at Christ Cathedral at 3:30 p.m. And then Kansas Wesleyan is also hosting a community service project called Feed My Starving Children, where they're packing meals for those that are less fortunate. And then Monday, January 18th, is a youth service at St. John's Missionary Baptist Church.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That's great. Well, I have a signed proclamation for you. I just want to add that the activities each year just keep getting better and better and better. And I don't have the list of names, but the Martin Luther King Jr. Ad Hoc Committee.
Yes.
A great deal of thanks goes out to the folks that have been involved.
In particular, Sandy Beverly and Lisa Upshaw, they definitely have done a great job. And so, yeah. And also, for those that are watching, the interfaith service will be broadcasted on Access TV. That's a plug. All right.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, sir. And I have this signed proclamation for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Item 3.2, the day of January 14th, 2016, as Salina Day for Kansas Wesleyan basketball in the city of Salina. Chris Fear, men's basketball coach, will read the proclamation.
Great. Coach Fear. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Whereas Kansas Wesleyan University was founded in Salina in 1886, beginning a town and gown relationship that has provided wonderful benefits to both parties. Whereas Kansas Wesleyan has provided a college educational opportunity for students in Salina, has contributed to the cultural climate of the city with music and theater programs, contributed to the quality of life by providing college athletic contests to attend, has provided a significant economic impact to the community and a part-time entry-level and college-educated workforce for the community. Whereas the Salina community has provided a great place for Kansas Wesleyan University students to attend college with access to part-time jobs, internships, and potential full-time employment upon graduation. It has also provided an attractive community for faculty and staff to live and work. Whereas the basketball program has been a significant focal point for Kansas Wesleyan and the Salina community since the first games in 1905. Whereas the university has invested in the Student Activities Center and Maybe Arena, providing an outstanding venue for fans to attend college basketball games. Whereas the current men's and women's basketball programs, under the direction of coaches Chris Fear and Ryan Showman, continue to bring pride to the university and the Salina community with athletic success, academic achievement, and community service. Last year, Kansas Wesleyan was the only KCAC member to have both the men's and women's teams honored by their respective coaches' associations for academic achievement. So now, therefore, I, John Blanchard, Mayor of the City of Salina, Kansas, do hereby proclaim the day of January 14, 2016 as Salina Day for Kansas Wesleyan basketball. The City of Salina encourages all students interested in college basketball, Kansas Wesleyan University, or academic achievement to attend the Kansas Wesleyan games at Maybe Arena on this date. The women's and men's teams host Friends University in KCAC contest with the women's game beginning at 6 and the men's game at 8 p.m.
All right, great. Well, we're really pleased to be a part of that. What is it? The Gowns and Town and Gowns.
The Town and Gown.
The Town and Gown
The Town and
Association.
Gown,
I mean,
yes.
it's great.
Yes.
I know it's a big deal for this commission and the city as a whole and staff and everybody to have strong relationships with Kansas Wesleyan and our other institutions of higher learning. Are there any other, besides the games going on Thursday, can you give us a little bit more information about anything else that might be happening?
Well, we're starting the second semester gets started tomorrow again, so we have students. The parking lots are filled up again this afternoon, and we just really appreciate the support of the Salina community that for all of our athletics programs. And there's a discount offer in the Salina Journal today for unlimited $5 adult tickets for that outing, and we keep the youth price at $2 as well because we really value the opportunity for those young people to be there and to see our student athletes and hopefully provide that mentorship and really be role models for those kids. That's a big deal for all of us.
Mm-hmm. And if you would, just one of the things that I'm really impressed about the men's and women's team, and you touched on it a little bit in the proclamation, was the academic, the stress that you put on student athletes at small liberal arts colleges. And can you just kind of tell us a little bit about the success that you've had from your men's team?
Well, from our team, it's been our kids do a great job making sure they go to class, doing well. Last year we finished with a 3.38 grade point average, which was second in our conference. The year before we were first, and actually last year we were ninth in the country in men's basketball. Wow. in grade point average, and so. We want our not only to be successful on the floor, but in the classroom and in the community. That's a very important part, and I think that those numbers are an indication of how well our students are doing and how well they not only are athletes, they are truly student athletes.
Right. And I go to a lot of your games, and I enjoy them a lot. And being a K-State graduate, I have a lot of purple. But I did want to represent for the Yotes today.
And
so
you look fantastic.
thanks.
Appreciate
Well, I
it.
have your signed proclamation. I hope that everybody will go to these games because they are a lot of fun.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, good luck. Okay. I'm glad it wasn't the KU Med School. I would have a real hard time wearing any Jayhawk stuff. My apologies to Commissioner Hardy.
Oh.
We will bring you your own autograph jacket to a meeting.
Okay, so before I start any fights up here, we'll move on to Citizens Forum. And this is an opportunity for anyone to speak on any item that's not on today's agenda. And we just ask that you approach the lectern here, give your name and address, and please limit your comments to 5 minutes. So we'll go ahead and open Citizens Forum.
Karen Shade, 111 Wisconsin. As I was listening to the news, Wichita is doing a national citizen survey, and that's why I put some of the information in front of you. They are asking their citizens what they think about roads and parks, and this is evidently done by a private company, and it produces results. One of the things I know about doing any survey is you have to be, if you're going to get bad results, you may not want to do the survey, and you need to be prepared to act on what you may find out. And if we were to do a survey here in Salina, I don't know how it would come out, especially between the battles between the city and the county. Maybe things just seem more prominently to be more in the battlefront, given the pending decision about annexation. Someone I very much respect, Marshall Rosenberg, boils communication down into needs for clarity, connection, and community. And clearly, this might be an issue where earnest people have differing points of view, and we need clarity on what the statutes say. But as we saw at last week's County Commission meeting, Commissioner John Price had a very tragic way of expressing the need for connection when he said he brought the problem to City Manager Jason Gage, and it wasn't resolved in a way he thought appropriate. And it made me start, I like to play with words, and so it made me start to question who was the important person in that scenario, who was the impotent person in the scenario, and who might be the imposter. And with that in mind, I think about how we in the U.S. have struggled with a difficult economy in the past few years. Kansas has faced some struggles, and Salina seems to have faced even more struggles. And I am taken back to the expression of Proverbs, yea, though I walk through the valley in the shadow of death, you don't pitch a tent. You keep going through. And my hope is that I don't know who the imps are. Imps are little fairies or gnomes, and I think there's a few throwing some mud around, and we just need to move on through these issues. Because I don't think the citizens of this area really care if it's the city or the county's fault. We would just really like to see things moving along. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Karen.
Commissioners, Mayor Blanchard, Chief Kelsey from Salina Fire Department, just wanted to give a brief information to you all about the ISO rating that the fire department has achieved for the city of Salina. It is a insurance service office rating for all cities in the United States, and the city has currently, we were at a rating of a 3. We have just moved to a rating of ISO 2 within the city. That will take effect in April of this year. And it certainly will help not only commercial businesses but residentials. It may help some in insurance costs. And I just wanted to make that public that we have achieved that for the fire department and for the city.
Well, good. That's great news. What were the main criteria that bumped the rating up?
There is 4 main criteria, and emergency communication center is one. The fire department staffing, equipment, and truck placement is another. And water system supplies is another. And the 4th being a risk reduction as far as fire codes, fire prevention, fire investigations, and so forth. Those are the 4 main criteria that they use.
Okay.
Just to add a little something to that, Mayor, the worst rating that ISO offers is a 10, the best is a 1, and 10 basically means you don't have any protection, any response at all. And I think, Calvin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe when we were talking earlier, he said that there are 8 ratings of 2 in the state of Kansas.
That's correct.
So when you're a 2, and I think 1 or 2, I think 2 1s. So when you're within the top 8, you're in an elite class. It's very difficult to get to a 1. It's really a big resources issue at that point in time, but a 2 is really considered to be a top-notch level rating. It's a big deal for us. We've been wanting a 2 for 20 years.
Oh, really?
Truly.
Well, that's good. Well, I offer you congratulations, but from the criteria that you mentioned, it occurred to me that folks on staff like Martha Tasker and getting the water system up to grade, getting the proper bays put into place and remodels done so we could service and put equipment in the right places is critical and important. And so it sounds like an awful lot has gone into. So congratulations to you guys, but also to city staff for
Thank you. It definitely was a
helping make
team
that
effort,
happen.
that's for sure.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Super.
Congratulations,
Thank you.
Chief.
Okay. All right. So, is there any other citizens interested in participating? Seeing none, we'll move past public hearings since there are no public hearing items and move into the consent agenda.
Item 6.1, approve the minutes of January 4th, 2016. Item 6.2, approve resolution number 16-7311, authorizing the mayor to execute an acceptance of a trustee's deed by John K. Vanier II as trustee of the John K. Vanier II Trust, donating a tract of real estate to the city as part of the proposed downtown fieldhouse project.
Okay. Are there any items on the consent agenda that any commissioner would like to have removed and or amended? Okay, seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries 5-0. We'll now move in to administrative business.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
even though we did approve the consent agenda, I think I certainly want to thank the Vanier Trust and John Vanier in particular for being a living example of what people mean by being committed to the growth of our city. This is a very nice gesture that doesn't even begin to describe how far it goes, but it certainly will allow us to complete the field house in the best way possible and use all that downtown space. So certainly want to thank the Vanier family.
Okay. And I think that was a good comment, and appreciate that. Okay, move to administrative business then.
Item 7.1, first reading ordinance number 16-10818, amending section 5-25 of the Salina Code to permit consumption of alcoholic liquor at Dean Evans Stadium.
Okay, Mr. Hardesty.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. This ordinance would amend Section 525 of the City Code to allow alcohol at Dean Evans Stadium. Visit Salina, ourselves, and Salina Baseball, Inc. have been in initial conversations with a group that would potentially like to bring a professional baseball league to Salina. We wanted to remove any barriers that might stand in their way, as a key factor in their business plan is the sale of alcohol at their games. So we looked at other city facilities that already allow this, like the Bicentennial Center, the Community Theater, Smoky Hill Museum. So we'd like you to consider this amendment to the code There is no city expense associated with this item. We are recommending that you approve ordinance 16-10818, amending the code. I'll stand for questions.
Okay, any questions for staff?
Just one, when alcoholic beverages are sold, which entity is actually selling them?
We have not negotiated that. There would definitely be a process to go through to know who's going to be doing the selling, and that would have to be established yet. We just, at this point, wanted to remove any barriers that would prevent this league from potentially coming to town.
Are there any, did you have another question?
Well,
I'm sorry.
If the league does not come to town, are there plans to sell it at other events there?
No, we would not be selling it at youth events or our normal parks and recreation events. This would just be, if this comes to fruition, that we would use this in their business model. They'd still have to apply and do all the necessary regulations.
Okay, that was my concern about
Yes.
the other youth events. Okay.
So are you suggesting that if the professional team does not end up locating here, that it would probably more or less sit dormant?
It could sit dormant. There could be other groups that would want to use that, but of course they would have to apply and get the necessary regulations.
Okay. Yep.
It would just eliminate a barrier that would not prevent something like this from happening. Very similar to the football team at the Bicentennial Center. Alcohol sales are allowed at those games.
Right. And there's no special controls that need to be in place for fencing or anything like that we dealt with in some of the other places?
Right, and the nice thing about Dean Evans is it is completely fenced in.
Okay.
So we are able to define that area
Okay.
rather than just
What about like restroom facilities
broad
and all
area.
that? Are there any requirements on that and making sure that you're adequately?
Well, if it's helpful, the code section that's being amended contemplates being subject to approved rules and regulations. So each of the locations that are currently identified in the code have standalone rules and regulations that have been adopted. So it would be likely that we would customize a set of rules and regulations to Dean Evans Stadium to address the specific issues that might be of concern.
Okay.
Yeah, Commissioners, well, this would allow us to make it legal, so it's not illegal. It doesn't in any way prohibit or inhibit our ability to administratively guide how we'd like to do that. So
Right.
that's something,
Okay.
as we get closer, we'll be looking closely at.
Okay.
other questions.
No further questions.
Thank you.
We'll open it for public comment at this time, though.
Judy Larson, 2801 Ray Avenue. I don't know where Dean Evans Stadium is.
It's out by the. It's on Markley. It's by the golf course.
Okay, no, it's
Yeah, it's the
like
big. It's the big.
east.
It's the
East.
furthest east.
Got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Okay. Any other public comment? Okay. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission for action on this item.
I move we approve on first reading ordinance number 16-10818, amending section 5-25 of the Salina Code to permit consumption of alcoholic liquor at Dean Evans Stadium.
Second.
Okay. I have a motion. Oh, sorry. Motion and a second to approve on first reading ordinance number 16-10818, amending section 5-25 of the Salina Code to permit consumption of alcoholic liquor at Dean Evans Stadium. Is there any further discussion on this item? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries 5-0.
Item 7.2, consider accepting the offer to purchase the vacant lot located at 2626 Quail Hollow Drive.
Okay, Mr. Hobby.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. We have brought to you today a request from city staff to sell a parcel located at 2626 Quail Hollow Drive. It is the remaining unbuilt lot in the original subdivision of Pheasant Ridge Number 2. The city purchased this property back in 2001 on a tax sale, and they paid about $1,100 for almost $1,200 for the lot itself, plus the back taxes that were due for the remaining liens for the special assessments on that property. So there remains no special assessments on the property, but the city has invested in the neighborhood of $12,050 for the project itself. The city staff continues to maintain the property by having it mowed and through our contract mower on an annual basis. This last year, we mowed the property 5 different times. We have put out for public notice and bidding process, the process for accepting bids for this property. We received one request for, or one proposal, excuse me, for this property. It was from Mr. Stan Byquist, and he happens to represent a local investment firm that does land transactions. His bid for the property was $22,000. Lakeview Estates is the property that he actually owns, or the company he actually owns and runs his land sales process through. Mr. Byquist does intend to repurpose this lot for a building site through another contractor that he works with on an annual basis. Today we give you 2 options that we feel like would be proposed for this lot. One would be accept the offer of $22,000 from Lakeview Estates and for the repurposing of the lot for a new residential construction dwelling, or 2 would be to decline the value of $22,000 and either offer this property back for a sale through a local real estate firms through a multi-listing service, or sit on the property for a while until we get a better offer. I'll be more than glad to stand for any questions.
Questions for staff?
How does this offer compare to the value of surrounding properties?
We anticipate this is just a little bit lower than the values of the properties in subdivision just directly to the north, not by very much, between $3,000 and $5,000. We did have a verbal offer about a year ago now of close to $30,000 for the property. We did not accept that first offer.
Well, that when we look at the 22,000, but that doesn't include those other. You say they're within a few $1,000s of the other one, but those ones all have special assessments.
They would have special assessments.
So the values of those would be, instead of 22, would be more like 35.
The value of the lots is basically $25,000 without the special assessments.
Right.
Those special assessments, as you remember, were reduced in cost by investments from the city as well as some federal funding.
Right. What was the process for the? I mean, was it just an ad taken in the classifieds for letting people know that this was?
Sure. The process that we've gone through lately is we advertise it through our website. We also advertise it through our department website. We notified all the developers and contractors within the community through an email and mail service. We also offered it through the newspaper in a public hearing. 3 different times it was placed in the newspaper.
Okay. Well, I mean, it just seems like an awfully low price, and sort of the argument for the necessity of special assessments have been just how exorbitantly high the land costs are and everything, and it the real world kind of flies in the face of that argument. And so, because I got to tell you, if you read through the paper and you look for a lot, you can't find a lot for anything under probably 40,000.
In the new subdivisions you'll have in such as Quail Meadows has all sold out, so we don't know the actual prices, the sales price of those lots. But in Magnolia Hills, they start at $32,000 and move up from there.
But without the special assessment.
Without the special assessment, that's just the land.
So with
cost.
special assessments, we're talking a lot's around 45 to 50,000.
Yes.
I mean, starting out. Okay.
That'd be correct.
What was the reason the $30,000 offer was refused?
At that time, we felt like the offer was below market value.
And the market has gone down, up, or stayed the same?
No, sir, we only have one bidder again this time.
Well, I mean, if we keep a lot like this, we just have to keep mowing it. And we put more and more money into it year after year. It seems to me like we should have taken the $30,000. We haven't,
Well,
$22,000.
Hindsight.
Well, the truth is that, yeah, we didn't take the 30,000 because
remember that, yeah.
at this time, the 30,000 is still below value. And I think I think it really does illustrate the fact that it's like we have arguments being made about what it costs to do things, and then the real world shows up with numbers, and they don't match. They just don't match. So I don't know what to do other than to say the only other option that you've put on here, which is to list it with a real estate agency to list it and market it.
That would be correct.
And they'll take 6,000.
Yeah, Commissioners, I think if you reject the offer, that's what I would recommend, is to do that. You really need to think about what price you want to list it at. But the audience that we've talked about is our development community audience in our community. It's not necessarily the just folks who just want to build a home somewhere who may be looking for a lot. They may not think about going to our webpage, and it's very possible they may not even see it in the newspaper. I mean, you try to get there, but if you put it out there with a realtor and a brokerage agency and get it on MLS, if they're serious about looking, they'll find it there, and they'll have the information about it right there in front of them. So if you reject the offer, I think that'd be the best place if you're still interested in selling it.
Well, I mean, because the truth is, we're not getting $22,000 for this lot. We're getting $10,000 for this lot because we've put $12,000 into paying off the utilities and everything.
Yeah, as far as the net, that's correct.
Yeah, so we're set.
If you
So
put it through a realtor, you're going to lose that too. So, I mean,
the realtor gets paid on the commission.
Yeah, you'll pay commission with the realtor.
Yeah.
I presume it'll be
well, that's
6%. I don't know if it'll be somewhere in there.
Well, okay. Any further questions for staff? Thank you, Mr. Hobby.
Sure.
Any public comment on this? Okay. Bring it back for action or discussion.
I move that we decline to accept the offer for 2626 Quail Hollow Drive from Stan Byquist at this time and offer the property for sale through the local Realtors Association.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to decline to accept the offer for 2626 Quail Hollow Drive from Stan Byquist at this time and offer the property for sale through the local Realtors Association. Is there any further comments at this time? I have a question in regard to the scope of local Realtors Association. What does that?
Well, you'll have to list it through a local realtor's brokerage agency. So you'll go to whatever realtor or brokerage company that's in town. There's a handful of them. Would need to choose one of those, sign an agreement for them to list it, which would at that point in time you'd be dealing with what the fee would be for that, the commission. We'd have to determine what you would want them to initially price it at. They go through, I mean, they're trained to actually look at property and property aspects and to help you with pricing. Doesn't mean it'll be what we would want, but they're trained to do that. So you could utilize their services, or you could just say we want to list it for whatever price. And then depending on how long it sets, or if it sets for quite a while, there may be a conversation about reducing the price at some point.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, and on that, I feel fairly confident with that, because what we've been hearing about that area at Quail Hollow is that those lots are selling fast, and there's a great demand for them, and I believe, weren't they looking at an additional phase?
Yes.
On that as well. So it's not like it's in a area that doesn't have anything else going on in it. So.
No, and as Gary mentioned before, the issue with that lot had to do with the lift station. And with the lift station, there wasn't room to build a house, so it was really useless from that perspective. But now that the lift station's been removed, if we've adjusted the easement, it's like a typical lot in there. So you would think there would be some market value.
That's what it was, lift station. I knew there was something on that property that...
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll just have the motion and the second to decline to accept the offer for 2626 Quail. Any further discussion at this time? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
nay.
Okay, thank you. That motion carries 4-1 with Vice Mayor Crawford in dissent. Okay.
Commissioners, real quick, then the next step, if you, again, I think the original motion you had to work with the local Realtors Association, which I believe means you want us to list it. We would need to, if you have a preference of which real estate company you want us to work with, we would need to know that. If you don't, then simply authorizing staff to look at them and choose one is fine. And if you have a particular minimum price you would like to initially list it at, we would need to know that as well. I think those are the two issues I can think of. I'll look to the others to see if there's any other factor we need to know about.
Okay. And maybe if we could get, I'm sure that you have information, as Commissioner Hardy spoke of earlier, is that comparables?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, it's fairly typical that before you actually enter into the agreement, that a lot of times they will do some type of a comparability review and give you a kind of a recommended listing price. We could certainly work with a particular agency, get that, and bring it back, and then you could choose. I would say if we did that, though, whether you go with that recommended price or not, at that point, it would be probably best to go with the agency, unless there was some, real reason that you wouldn't want to do that, rather than to jump across to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
But we could go ahead and try to do that first.
Okay.
But it's up to you.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
Okay. Good.
So as a commission, you're comfortable with, in essence, authorizing staff to look at the real estate companies in town, find one to work with to get an initial evaluation of the property, and then bring that back to you as a recommendation prior to listing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would hope that we could get at least 30,000 out of the property.
I think so.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
7.3.
Item 7.3, consider accepting a proposal to purchase a vacant lot located at 234 South Phillips Avenue.
Okay, Mr. Hobby, once again.
Once again, here I am. We have lots for sale, potentially. This lot at 234 South Phillips Avenue happened to be on our dangerous structures list in 2014. Before it ever got to the point of doing the bidding for the dangerous structures through a demolition company, we started seeing a failing basement issues, and one of the walls basically collapsed in the house. So we went through an emergency process for emergency abatement of that structure, which we completed. And we had a contractor that we talked to multiple contractors, took the lowest cost of the contractor, went in emergency-wise, and took care of the structure itself. We have, with this lot also, have been taking care of the maintenance of the property ever since that demolition happened. We have approximately $7,000 invested in it through the demolition cost. We received this property as a donation from the property owner, due to the fact that they were unable to be able to pay for the demolition costs. We have a few $100s in expenses throughout the year so far as any mowing and maintenance costs are concerned. So we have a little over $7,000 invested in the structure itself, plus whatever we decide to sell the lot for. We offered this property also for sale publicly, just as we did with the last property, through the newspaper, websites, and email processes through developers. We've also placed a sign in the yard suggesting the property to be for sale. They could contact Development Services Office, just as we did with the Quail Hollow property. This one we happened to receive two separate bids for. One bid was from the Habitat for Humanity, in which they bid $2,000 for, and I apologize, I put the wrong number in the print. It says $2,200 in the actual blue sheet, and it was for $2,000. Habitat would like to repurpose this structure for a new family for their area of their Habitat for Humanity. The second offer we received was from Mr. Bill Whitaker, and the amount was $2,610. Both of these values are less than what we have invested into the property, so we offer for you the same response as we did the last one. We could accept either one of the two offers for the property, depending on your desire, whether you want to receive the $2,000 or the $2,610 for the property, or decline to take this property for sale at this time. Either one of the offers, decline either offer, and place the property back on the multi-listing service through the Realtors Association in Salina. So we have two opportunities for you to consider.
Excellent. Any questions for staff at this time?
Yeah. Would it be reasonable to assume that if anyone had bought this property before the walls fell in, that person would have had to then spent the money to demolish what was left of the building?
That is very correct. We feel like that by our getting involved right away, we have saved several $1,000s in the bidding process since the house was already partially collapsed. So, yes, whoever purchased the property would have had to repair either restore the house, pick it up, put in a new foundation underneath it, or demolish the structure.
So it would not be unreasonable then to try to recoup the cost of the demolition as
It
well?
is not
I'm using
unreasonable
that
to do
same
that.
logic.
You have already invested over $7,000 in the property. You're correct.
Do you have any idea what the market is in the surrounding
The
properties?
closest comparable I had was within 12 blocks of the area, and it was a $15,000 property. The difference between this one and the other one we looked at for the comparable is the other one was a full lot width of 50 foot by 110 feet, and it was not two partial or two portions of two parcels right next to it. This property is kind of strange, and in fact, it's basically the north 50 feet of a parcel that's 110 feet deep. So it's kind of a strange design for the property.
Is it 50 by, is the dimension 50 by 110? Or is
Yes,
it-
sir. Mhm.
Okay.
50 by 100.
Is
excuse
this
me.
the lot that is adjacent to the alley?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So it has some constraints as far as rebuilding is concerned as well, side yard setbacks and front yard as well.
Okay.
How big of a structure could they build on that?
I think Habitat would be, their sizes are anywhere from 11 to 1,300 square feet. I think you're closer to the 1,200 square foot size.
So you're talking about a 30-foot width of the building?
That's correct.
Okay.
Mhm.
On these, speaking of the buildings, are there plans to, it says there were no plans included with the bid, but is the bid of the, Mr. Whitaker, it looks like lives next door, and so would there be a plan to just expand the lot, or is that a plan to build?
The application for the bidding process indicates that he is at 236 South Phillips. When we look at our property mapping, we cannot verify that's his actual address, so
Okay.
we believe he lives next door according to the bidding process. Whether he owns or whether he rents that property, that would be the other question for sure.
Okay.
But we do know the Habitat will be rebuilding, but Mr. Whitaker was not explicit on what he wanted to do with the property.
Okay. And then do you know, do you know what the timing would be for Habitat? Would they be ready to put this property into productive use like
Habitat-
now, or would it be go into their land bank and wait 5 years before anything's done with it?
It's my understanding that Habitat is becoming slim on the number of lots that they have available, and that they would be building within a shorter period of time.
I would
Okay.
like to see this go to Habitat.
Well,
They're very difficult for them to get lots in Salina, and they like to have scattered sites, so most of those are north part of town, so.
I'd like to see the property get into a productive use in a neighborhood where when you start having vacancies, and they tend to multiply if you don't take care of that. So, and whether that's Habitat for Humanity or the guy has plans to build on it immediately. I do know that if say we were dealing with this in a land bank situation and we had it in a land bank, I think probably the criteria we would put on that sale would be, are you going to build right away? And so, if we're going to eat $5,000 on the deal, we get it in productive use, and we get it as a contributing part of that neighborhood, but also that it's in productive use at that point. So.
And you've been wanting infill for how long?
Well, right, and that's why I think if it's not just we want to spend $2,000, get our hands on it, and then wait 5 years to build. It'd be nice if you got someone else for $2,000 and they were ready to build tomorrow. That's kind of the goal.
So this becomes basically a $5,000 donation to Habitat Humanity. plus the property?
Well,
I mean, I understand.
I think it's more of a.
I understand the value to the city if someone's going to build a house on there, but then on the other hand, cities put a fair amount of money.
Yeah. A question, if I
property.
could, Mayor, to Gary. Gary, do you know what's the average value of the homes in that neighborhood, roughly?
The average value is, let's just say 75,000.
Okay.
They'll run 50 to 60 to 90.
So you're going to be limited on the size of any real new structure,
That would be
particularly if it has quality materials. And it kind of leads back to what is the market demand for that lot in that neighborhood, and are there builders? Have any builders come to us and said, "Hey, we'd like to build on that lot"? And I assume that they probably would have some kind of a proposal then if they had. So, and it's not to say that you couldn't still try to do that, but typically the builders focus on, for the most part, larger homes and a lot of different types of lot environments and different environments where the values are a little different there. So there is a limitation there. I can't say there isn't a market demand for being able to recover the cost to get $7,000 or $9,000 or whatever it might be out of that lot, but presumably there's not a long line of people that are waiting for that. So I don't know if we could wait. I mean, you could always choose to wait. And again, we could list that as well, like we did the other property, for a period of time and then decide. But a lot of it depends on what is your community development goal for the neighborhood as well, and what would you like to do.
I've been by that property, and it's right across the street from a school, which makes it especially nice for habitat.
Mm-hmm. Is there? Here we go, Mr. Perney. I was about to ask, is there anyone from Habitat that can speak to this? And
While Mr. Perney, are we under any obligation to justify why we would take the lower bid, or do we have that prerogative?
I'll let the attorney answer that question.
You do have that prerogative, and I do think it's helpful if you articulate the basis for whatever choice you think is in the public interest.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Perney.
Mr. Mayor and Commissioners, I am not currently on the board of Habitat for Humanity, but I think I've been on the board longer than any other individual
Except me.
in the community. And I was on the founding board in the beginning. The Habitat, there's several things I'd like to point out, and I'm disappointed that there's no current Habitat representative here. But at any rate, Habitat is building, I believe it's their 38th home.
28th?
38th.
38th.
And it's on Grand Avenue. It's on a site that was acquired at a tax sale and then donated to Habitat. Almost all the sites that they have built on have been donated, except for about a handful. And in those handful, Habitat paid anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000. I believe we paid $5,000 for one a few years ago because of the situation at the time and the inability to find any additional sites. They have at this time only one additional site. It's on North 8th Street, fairly far north, that is unbuilt. So if this property were turned over to Habitat, I would expect that it would be built upon within 2 years, maybe less. In recent years, they have been building houses at the rate of 2 per year. There is another Habitat house that was built a few years ago, again on a lot that was acquired at a tax sale and donated to Habitat. It's only 3 blocks away at the corner of Clark and Spruce, northwest corner. It's a smaller lot, actually, than this lot. So one of the advantages of this lot, most Habitat homes are only 24 feet wide because they've been designed to fit on the 40-foot lots that are common in North Salina. In North Salina, almost all the North Salina subdivisions are only 40 feet wide. So this lot being 47 feet wide and having alley access along the entire 110-foot length would be easy to build that style of a single-story ranch house with on-site parking that you would access the parking from the alley. So in those respects, it would work real well for the Habitat program. The other thing I want to mention, when you're talking about neighborhood values, I have a friend who just sold a house only in the next block south for price of only $30,000. I also know I was at a tax sale about 2 years ago. A house, I believe, is about 4 houses north of this lot, went to the tax sale and only got a sales price of $500. And that house is apparently repaired and occupied today. So the values in that neighborhood are not as high as we would like to envision them. On the other hand, it is a good location. It's close to lots of services. It's right across the street from the school, and it would work very well for a Habitat family. One other thing I want to make clear about Habitat is that the Habitat home buyers do pay the price of the home. The only thing that makes Habitat work, well, there's 2 huge things that make Habitat work. One is that the homes are largely built with volunteer labor and often with donated materials and services. There's still now, I haven't really seen the price of the latest houses, but I'm sure they're knocking on the door of $90,000 to $100,000, even with those assistances that people provide. But what really makes it work for the home buyer is there is zero interest, but they do pay payments that pay back the complete principal cost of the house over 20 to 25 years. They do have the rights to sell the house, and a few have been sold, but when they sell, that principal comes back to the organization. So the organization has enough houses out there now that can build at least 1 house a year just off the return of the principal on the first 30-some houses. At any rate, I can understand that the neighbor might have a good use for that property and that it would probably enhance the value of his house. On the other hand, from the complete community side, the sale to the Habitat for Humanity would probably be better. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And you went over your 3 minutes, but we appreciate
Thank you,
all the
Mr. Purdy.
information.
I'm sorry. I can talk faster.
I kid.
Thank you, Ed.
Yeah, and I'll just comment on that it's much more advantageous to have a home built on a lot instead of a lot combined to have a storage shed or something else on it. It's inefficient, and after you do a number of that, instead of having 22 houses on a block, you have 5, and you still have to pay for the water and the sewer and the street and the sidewalks and everything else on that. You just have fewer people paying for it. So I think to have the infill is a huge benefit. So, okay, any other public comment?
I don't know if Mr. Whitaker is here or not. I don't see him.
Okay.
The correction I'd like for you to make then would be into your motion, if you desire to give the house to Habitat for Humanity, would be the sales price would be at $2,000 rather than the $2,200 that are specified in the blue sheet. So that one correction I would like for you to make. Thank you.
Okay. Well, it would be really nice to be able to ask a question for Habitat and get their official response on that, and not knowing, I'm just not knowing what the gentleman that, Mr. Whitaker, what his plans are either. But I would like to see a house built on that thing as soon as possible. Any thoughts?
Mr. Mayor and Commissioners, then I would suggest that if you would like to have more input from the 2 people who have placed the bids, that we postpone this until the in 2 weeks, and place it back on the agenda item for you, and allow both of them to come and explain to you exactly what their processes were for the reason for their bids.
Does that have any impact on anything other than?
Just the input more than anything.
Well, knowing Mr. Whitaker's intent is probably important, but whichever way you go, and depending on where you go, you may likely want to lock down that intent, so it's more than a conversation in a meeting.
Right.
If it's important to you.
I think it is. Yeah.
That'd be part of the sales agreement.
Yeah.
Well, we know what the intent of Habitat is.
Well, yeah, but we don't know if it's when.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're trying to promote infill, there may be a builder out there that says, geez, 2,000? Build a small house on that and give it a go. If it's... But I'd entertain a motion for whatever.
I move we award the sale of a lot addressed at 234 South Phillips Avenue to Habitat for Humanity in the amount of $2,000 for the repurposing into a residential dwelling and forgiving the demolition costs incurred previously.
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second to... Let me pull that up. Here we go. Okay, my apologies. Get straight here. Motion and a second to award the sale of the lot addressed as 234 South Phillips Avenue to Habitat for Humanity in the amount of $2,000 for the repurposing into residential dwelling and forgiving the demolition costs incurred. Any motion and a second for that? Any further comments or questions? I'd just kind of like to know have a little bit more certainty on timing and everything else, but there is a motion and a second on the table, so is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. That carries 4-1 with Mayor Blanchard in the dissent. Okay. Well, having said that, I hope that that gets built on right away, and because that, I think, is the intent that all of us would like to see. So, okay, 7.4.
Item 7.4, continued discussion of future capital improvements and sales tax.
Okay, Mr. Gage.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. A week ago, we talked about the future of our existing 0.4% special purpose sales tax. We talked about the current tax, the summary of capital uses for the tax, considerations for the future use and needs, the sales tax of comparable cities, and policy considerations. And from that, you had a few questions, and I can hit a couple questions real quick, then I have some additional information that won't take long to go through. We'll want to let you know the slide on sales tax of comparable cities has been updated with my copy-paste errors eliminated. A couple questions. One had to do with how the ID law would affect a mail-in ballot. And according to Don Merriman, the county clerk, he said that it does not apply to the mail-in ballots. They mail a ballot to every registered voter in the city, and then they verify signatures upon receipt of the ballot. So that particular law, as it's in place and in practice right now, wouldn't affect a mail-in ballot situation. The other question had to do with whether or not an action by you to use a mail-in ballot would be petitionable. His thought is that it wouldn't be, but he admitted, he said, that's really out of my area, and that's a question for the legal counsel. So as we looked at this, a couple pieces of information. One is I've included in your packet the comparable city property tax rates. You get a little better idea. There's other things to look at that we talked about fees and things, but fees are difficult to parse out. For example, parks and recreation fees or municipal court fees and fines or things like that. Utility rates are fairly easy to compare, but again, a lot of times that's related to the health of your utilities, so it's a little different than this piece. But if we look at the comparable city property tax rates, and these are for 2015, we've got the total, which is the overlapping, which includes all taxing entities, city, county, school, and the airport authority, and other small folks. It does not include the tax rates for like a community improvement district is I'm sorry, but that's a city tax rate. It does not include anything that's special in there. So when we look at our tax rate, the overlapping with the comparable cities we looked at, I didn't go beyond that list that we talked about last time, and it's in mils. It ranges from a low of Hayes at 110.909 mils. Salina is 133.852 mils. And then it goes to high of Dodge City, which is 185.290 mils. And again, that ranges from the cities that we first listed as comparables. It doesn't include every city in the state. But what you see is Salina is still fairly low when we look at the overlapping, and that includes really 2 phases of a major school bond issue in there, and that's a big part of that. You'll find with all the overlapping mills, the school district's portion, by virtue of the type of entity they are, is by far the highest piece, typically. If you go across to the column where we're dealing with the city property tax rates, we have Salina's at 27.08 mils. There are only 3 cities of the comparables that are less than that. Overland Park is well below that. Leawood is just over 24, and then Hayes is at 25. The rest of the comparable cities that we looked at are all higher than that. You will many times see the Johnson County type cities lower because a lot of times they'll have a different type of development. And for example, if you have a small footprint and multiple levels of a corporate office building, you can afford to have a lower mill rate because you're going to have a higher assessed valuation. And many times you'll see that communities with lower assessed valuations will have a higher mill rate, and communities with higher assessed valuations will have a lower mill rate. But as we look at that and we just look at mill rate only, you'll find Salina as a city, the city-only mill rate is very, very low, and historically it has been pretty low. And that's a conscious decision that the governing bodies have made over the last probably 30 years, is to try to keep that fairly low. But anyway, it is what it is when you look at it. You will see some of our comparable cities. Lawrence, for example, is a little over 31 for the city. Garden City's about almost 32. Wichita, which is lower in sales tax significantly, is 32.291, so almost 32.3 mils, which is about 5 mils higher than the city of Salina. So pretty close to 18 to 20%, somewhere in there.
So they get more of their money. And Wichita has a low sales tax rate, right?
Yes, yeah, they have a much lower sales tax rate.
Quite a bit higher property tax.
They have somewhat higher property tax. Yeah, when you look at the other cities, you wouldn't say quite a bit, but as a percentage, it's pretty close to 20%, 18 to 20% higher. So overall, that's pretty significant. Topeka's about 39.7, Hutch is 43, Kansas 43, Manhattan's almost 44, Abilene 45. You have Derby, Junction City's a little over 47, Pittsburgh 48, Dodge City almost 51, and McPherson a little over 51. So it's a pretty big variance when we're at 27. And again, you'll see a lot of those cities that aren't near an urban area or smaller will have a higher rate. Took a look to, one of the questions was sort of comparing the tax amount of what an additional increment would generate with kind of based on the presumptive potential future uses, where the line would be drawn as far as, in other words, if you went up by 0.125%, if you would choose to do that. We talked about last time what that would generate, what we'd estimate for that to generate, but we didn't necessarily talk about it when you compare it to what the potential needs are. And again, that list of needs was very prospective. There's nothing hard and fast about that. But as you go down the list, you'll see the 2017 estimate for the sales tax is about 4.9 million, and we based the assumptions on increment from there. So it's a little bit adjusted from the last week version for this purpose. But if you go with an 8 cent, that's about 6.4 million, and we had the future use considerations ranges from about 5.3 to about 9.3. That's a pretty big range, and all depends on where you want to go. But if you look at it, that means you could either look at it with a surplus of just over $1 million to a deficit of almost $3 million, depending on where you fall into that future use range. And so as we went down from an eighth to a quarter to a 0.3, put a 0.35 in there, the line drawn, if you looked at the future use considerations and you looked at the high number, the line would be drawn between a 0.35 and a 0.4, and it's pretty close to a 0.35. So it all depends on what you think your future use considerations are, and I'm not here to tell you what that should be, but if you use the high number, the line would be drawn to where you're about even with the 0.35%. So that kind of help you at least get a feeling for the increment based on your perspective of the use cost, future cost of the uses. went in and did a little summary here, but you have attached the list of a report that the Saline County Clerk Don Merriman provided some time ago on election turnout. That was one of the questions we talked about. And what we have here is the summary starts with 2009 and goes backwards to 2000. And we've included the voter turnout from the city general elections. And then when it just says general, that would be a federal and county type election. And then if they have a primary, and they had the primary divided by party, because each party has their own primary. But what we found is, quite honestly, the general city elections are very low as we anticipated. You have 16% and 18%. We did have a 36%, which is actually very, very high in 2005. 20%, and then so it ranges from around 12, 14% up to about 20%. The federal type election that you typically see in even number years was actually pretty high. You had anywhere from a 49% to upwards of the low 60%. So it was actually a little bit higher than I had anticipated we would find when we looked at it. I did ask Don, and he indicated he'd be happy to provide an update to get the elections between 2009 and today, but I don't think you're going to find a lot of difference in there. And you will typically see the presidential election usually has a bit of an edge to a non-presidential federal election, but even the non-presidential years were actually pretty high, higher than expected. But again, those are what they are. They're a little higher than what I expected, but that's good to know. I mean, there's good turnout for those, and that's what you want initially. So as you think about the mail-in ballot, maybe more of a timing consideration and use of the tool versus just a pure response. So anyway, we included that in there as well, and I think that pretty much covers everything that I had included. So I'd be happy to take it back over to you if you have any questions or thoughts.
Okay.
I
Questions?
have a question.
Questions, comments? Okay, great.
I was looking at the summary of, and maybe I'm looking at this wrong, but the summary of capital uses and commitments to date. So that includes this, I'm assuming that includes the Kenwood Cove, is included in the Kenwood Cove. And on that, the investment in streets, bridges, and sidewalks was $7.86 million. On future use, and we're talking about what we're talking about now for use of, I know everybody's tired of me talking about streets, but I think you have to start somewhere on streets. It's $1.6 million to $3.6 million. So that's half as much as what we've spent.
Yeah, the first one, the summary of uses to date, covers, that's the total for all the years we've been collecting and spending on those. So when we look at streets, bridges, and sidewalks, that's from basically 2009 through 2015. We spent almost $8 million. On the future use, that's an annual cost range, so 1.6 to 3.6. So if you take that times years, you'll find that.
I see that says annual, and I didn't.
Yeah, and the 1.6 is pretty close to where it's really where we are right now. We've been spending about 1.6 this year, and last year it'd probably average out right in there. So it's sort of where we are today, and the 3.6 assumes you'd want to put up to $2 million more in streets, bridges, and trails. So, but again, that's just per year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you'd see that would be significantly higher as an investment, as it should be if you decide to do that.
And the park facility and rehab, is that could be used for new restrooms in the
Absolutely.
Sunset Park?
And I kind of broke these down by subcategories, but a lot of the things here could all fall under capital projects, facilities, and equipment. Just gives you a little bit of a topical idea of sort of what we're thinking from an allocation. And the park facility rehab and replacement is based on an internal estimate from the Parks and Recreation Department.
Just so it's clear, on page 2, the revenue with the increment assumptions, those percentages in the leftmost column would be in addition to the current, was it 9.4%?
Yeah, you're talking about the additional information this week that you didn't have last week. Right. And yes, that's if you had an added increment of, say, 0.125%, it would result in okay, I see what you're asking now. You're talking about the total number rounded. And that total.
The total tax, let's just say there's a line under the 0.35, that would take the tax to 9.75.
Total tax would be 9.2 million at the 0.35. Current and new increment would be total 9.2.
The total tax percentage then would be?
If
Is
we're
it
at
nine?
0.35, the total would be
9.4 now?
0.75, because we're at 0.4 today. So if you had the 0.35, we would be at 0.75, and the total revenue would go from approximately 4.9 million to 9.8 million.
But that would make the actual sales tax, the number you'd see on your receipt at the cash register would be
Well,
9 point,
this is one piece of it. The number you see at the cash register would be, at this point, what are we, 8.4%, I believe. So if that doesn't change from any other perspective, and you add 0.35, it'd be 8.75%.
75. Okay.
8.6.
I'm with you. I think that the numbers on the presidential election years, especially in the 80s and 90s, were huge. 87% was one of them, 72%. They usually click in lately around 63%. They look pretty consistent. So that seems to be a pretty good participation rate. If we were thinking that the mail-in at 50% was good.
Yeah, and as you know, the mail-in, that's the only mail-in example we have, so it's not to
Right.
say that you couldn't do better than that. That's just what we have for that issue. So yeah, it really is, it's not necessarily a question at this point of, or could be, but of participation. Either way, you're going to get it appears to have a pretty good rate of success for participation. It may be, if there is a question, it may be a question of, does an issue get totally lost in the long fall ballot or not? And is that a factor? Does it affect the ability to educate the public when all you see are political ads and campaign things all over? Does your issue get lost in the education piece? Those are just questions I raise. I can't say whether it would or they wouldn't, but I know those are questions that were raised to the legislature when they were talking about changing your election time frame anyway.
Well, how many people pay attention to any of it at all? You know what I'm saying? It's
I don't
like
know how you can
we're
avoid
worried
it.
about it getting lost. A lot of people don't pay any attention to any of it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it
So-
does get lost, and I think a lot of it gets tuned out because, quite honestly, it's very, very negative at
Right.
that time because most people can say they're going to campaign positively, but generally speaking, and at the higher levels is what I'm talking about, it's very, very negative, and you hear a lot of negative. You've got to talk about how someone's destroying something before you can put yourself in and build it up sometimes at the higher levels, and that's unfortunate.
At the questions regarding the rate, the line you have there is between 0.35, because 0.35 wasn't there before. So am I assuming that 0.35 is pretty much when we ask the question of, when we talk about what we see as future needs, what's the, if we don't want to take any more than we absolutely need, that 0.35 would be that number?
Yeah, the prior list, we had 0.125, 0.25, 0.3, 0.4, and 0.5, and those were just thrown out as examples. But then when the question came, well, what increment does it take to meet what we think are the projected needs? I thought, well, we'll fill it in and put the 0.35 in between 0.3 and 0.4. But when we actually looked at that, there's an assumption that says on the future needs that you're looking at that high range number. And again, those are guesstimates at this point in time. We don't have an exact number, and it can be kind of what you want it to be depending on how much you want to invest in your community. But we had on the future use considerations a total of 5.32 to 9.35. So if you presume you want to be at the 9.35 million annual investment level in 2009 or probably 2018, it takes you a 0.35 additional increment to fund it at that level. And so that just happened to be kind of where it fell.
Right.
I wonder if there's a psychological element involved in that question as well. If you consider the 0.35 increase, then you're almost doubling the special sales tax rate that's in effect. And I did it a little quick math, and my goal was looking at 8 million, which would be closer to the 0.25 that would keep us below a lot of the surrounding communities in terms of total sales tax. And what I did was on page 3 of our slide presentation, I took those ranges and I used the midpoint of the ranges from property tax down to neighborhood redevelopment. And then for streets, bridges and trails, I used the number of 3.2 million and left the river renewal at 1.35 million. That came out to 8 million. And just from first blush, that seemed fairly a fairly good place to land.
So what was your percent, what was it? Point what?
That would be at a 0.25 increase
0.25.
instead of 0.35.
And can you just say again what the assumptions were based on?
The assumption I used was getting to the $8 million that would be provided by a 0.25.
Right, no, I just
cent
meant,
increase.
I meant that if the 2.25 is, that increment is assumed to raise 7.962, or
Mhm.
roughly 8 million,
Mm-hmm.
the assumption
I had
that the increment will generate that.
8, right, correct.
At what, I mean, what type of growth assumption?
Well, I was just going by the numbers that were
And maybe, Jason,
provided
I mean,
by staff.
since you guys
right.
put the number, the question is mainly to you. What's that 0.25 increment based on what sort of growth projection?
Well, the 0.25 is if you took in 2000. I estimated that their current tax in 2017 would raise about $4.9 million. The current 0.4%. So that was the basis for a 0.35 or a 0.25 increment. All these increments generating what they generate was based on the proportionate increment. Now, once you set what typically we find, we probably, if we go back and looked at our sales tax growth as far as natural growth in the last few years, we would probably find that averages somewhere between probably 2 and 3.25%, somewhere in there, 2.5, 3, somewhere in there. So this is a base for, in essence, like say for example, 2017. But whenever you set that base, you will have growth. We expect to have an average of 2.5 to 3% growth each year. That's fairly typical in most years. We saw after the recession, we saw kind of a little bit of dip, but it came back pretty fast, and there's a little bit up and down, but it really didn't stay down. Didn't go down very far. Didn't stay down very long. But you'd estimate about 2.5 to 3% a year from that. That the numbers, the rounded dollar estimates for each increment were based on 4.9 million in 2017. And that based on a current 0.4% sales tax.
Okay.
So they're proportionate to that. And quite honestly, it depends where you want to be, because there's a lot of ways to look at it, and there's a lot of glasses to look through when you're looking at it. And if you're looking at comparability to other communities, that's correct. A 0.25 would put you at 8.65, which is equal to Garden City. Manhattan, Hayes, Overland Park, Leawood, First, and all the other cities would be higher than that, all the way up to Junction City at 9.75. And ultimately, it's what your community wants to do, based on how you want to propose using it. And they have to look at the investment in the community the same way you look at it. I will say these other communities with higher sales taxes they're going to be putting that into their communities, and they're competing with Salina. So you have to think about, is that a factor or not? Are communities like Manhattan and Hayes and McPherson down the road, Hutchinson and some of those, does that matter to you, the money that they have to invest to make their community better? Is that a factor? Do you think that matters? It might and it might not. That's up to you. Or is it more important for you to stay underneath them without even getting into the sort of the lower tier of that group? And again, and then finally, really the issue is how much do you really believe you need if you want to have the quality of streets that we've been talking about and some of the other types of improvements that I think we all believe the community, if you put that together and you put each of the various sectors of the community together and the needs that they've vocalized to you, I think it pretty much adds up to that. Knowing that not everybody likes every item on the list, but it pretty much adds up to that. If you believe that, then it's a matter of how close do you want to be able to fund that at whatever level. And again, that's why we gave you a range on the future use considerations, because there's not a perfect number for that. It depends on what you would like to see invested in your community and what you think your community would like to invest in itself in the future. That's really what it comes down to.
Talking about the other night at 8.65, was that what we were landed on?
That's if we're at 8.4 now.
Yeah.
So if you add
Raise that
0.25,
little
you're
bit.
at, yeah.
But right now, as far as keeping our streets up, we're just kind of on a treadmill. And and that's not anything against the street department or the engineers or anything, but it's just kind of, we're just sort of,
We're treading water.
yeah.
Well,
that's
Yeah.
what we're doing.
and we
So
have a lot of streets.
And I'd like to see it have enough that we have. But I mean, you got to start somewhere. So I'd like to see us have enough that we can stabilize and keep our property tax low, because that's a very hated tax. And I just think people would like to see things done in the community to have enough to do it with.
Right.
Well, I do like Commissioner Hardy's math on estimating what we would need for this future expenses, and I do share the vision of 0.35 being almost the same as 0.4, and those who might oppose this tax will decry this as a doubling of the tax. In real numbers, 0.25 is still, 5/8 of whatever that is, of the 0.4, so it's not an inconsequential increase, but if it satisfies what we need, it would be acceptable. The other issue is, I don't think we want to price the tax so high that it doesn't get approved. And the lion's share of this still goes towards streets. Streets, and the river gets probably the next biggest chunk.
Yeah, Commissioners, quite honestly, it's hard to read it into the minds of your voters, particularly
Right, exactly.
because, as we know, there are people that we see, that you see all the time, but that is such a small portion of the percentage that I call a silent majority that's going to show up to vote on this. And no matter what information you put out, some of it will be read, some of it will be forgotten, some of it won't be read, and someone will walk up there, they'll look at the language, and they'll make a decision. And so I'm not
think
sure there's much
if
difference in a
if we
0.5 increment. I think
bring in a
it's-
large amount, we will find a way to spend it.
Well, here,
Yeah.
well, I mean, as part of the discussion, and I'm tracking what you're saying, and I think I'm fairly in line with the same thought process there, and is that setting this rate is not scientific, but what is part of the process was going through and discussing how important some of those priorities were, and that's why it was important to me to say where does that line fall if we're saying these are the expectations that we think we have a certain level of quality of services that people have come to expect. What do we need to do? And I view that as the bottom line, as that's where we are, and then maybe some of the other things are a little increase on that, on what we may need and what we may want future increases, notwithstanding as part of that. And so, with the point, I'm comfortable with asking the first ask, and since we have a couple of shots at this, I'm comfortable with the first ask coming at what we think as a community our needs would be and what rate meets those needs. And then knowing that we'll get feedback on that, and I'd rather have that feedback and take another shot at it with a lower rate than just assuming that, well, let's just cut back and let's cut back on services and not give people what they want or expect, and leave it on the table if it's not there, because we can come back and ask for it. I just don't see a whole lot of difference between 0.35 and 0.3. I'm comfortable with both of those. I think if it does come to 0.25, I think that still works. But I'm not opposed to, if the line was down at underneath 4.4, I'd feel a little, I think the psychology we talk about, I think starts to affect me. But I think right now for me it's more of a math problem than a psychology problem. And
there's a lot of fluff in the future use considerations. That's a wide range of estimate. Now, if we had concrete projects and we knew the streets were going to cost 3.6, the river cost this, whatever capital project we were going to do costs 1.8, too. I mean, if we had a list of 6 things and it totaled 9.2 million, and they were all important, that say, okay, let's ask for 9.2 million.
Yeah,
But
Commissioners.
there's a lot of wiggle room in there.
One thing we don't like to do is to like lay out a bunch of projects and put dollars on them, and I'll tell you why. First of all, we've had experience with some projects lately, and we found that with the tightening of our economy, particularly as it relates to construction, with our utility project and then with the building project, we're seeing the costs go up pretty fast, and I think that's across the whole region. We could put in here and say, we're going to do this street, and it's going to cost this amount of money. I'm going to tell you, 8-10 years from now, or if in a 20-year sales tax year at 16, it's going to be wrong. And what a lot of times will happen is your cost of construction can go up depending on the time, and depending on the factors, can go up faster than what you'd expect to get as an increase in your sales tax too. So there's a lot of surprises along the way. Now, when we went down and I looked at these capital needs and spent a lot of time with staff, start with streets. Again, this year's 1.6 million, and since this current 0.4 sales tax has been in place, it's ranged from a minimum of 1 million up to about, I think we were up to about 1.7 or 1.8 one year, but 1.6 million is today. 2 million, when we put a range, 2 million, I could use 2 million in crack sealing and microsurfacing only, not curb and gutter repair, not concrete replacement with streets that are concrete failing, not in the neighborhood streets as far as doing anything besides crack sealing and microsurfacing. So your street number can have a big range to it depending on the level of what you want to do in that. The property tax stabilization is all about what you believe, and it's really something that we don't know. We know it's varied in the past too, and it has helped the commission to have a better time budgeting without feeling like you have to raise property taxes, particularly for operating type things, or even for certain capital items. And it's ranged up to about $900,000. So that's where the million came from. Now, in a good budget year, you're not going to have to use property tax stabilization that much. But if we go through a recession, you may rely on it a little bit more for 3 or 4 years until everything kind of gets more stable. The park facility rehab is, again, it's 400 is on the low end because, quite honestly, that doesn't include any enhancement, doesn't include when we talk about master planning and doing anything. It really doesn't include any of that. We'll have to shake that out to see, but we have a lot of parks and a lot of acreage and a lot of facility needs out there. The economic development is based on the knowledge that the 320,000 has worked, but it's only worked because we really haven't had a lot of prospects to respond to. And when we're talking about things that maybe stay with the community, like land or a road or drainage, we really don't have the ability to chase that right now with the 320,000. And so, and I think I don't want to get too deep into how those funds are used, but I believe the strongest emphasis you'll find will be with things that stay in the community, not writing a big check and seeing it go down the road. And so that could easily be $500,000. It could be if the Community Economic Development Organization gets moving, once we get the full staff in place and they really get up to the level that we'd like them to be, you could have a year where you don't have enough at $500,000 a year, which is a good problem to have, but that's where that range came from. Go down to the neighborhood development is really a small piece. It's sort of a guesstimate. We don't know. And you have capital improvement dollars anyway. And then the Smoky Hill River renewal, if you choose to do that, that is basically based on taking the same increment from Kenwood Cove over a 20-year period. It's just a presumption that you could use that as a debt service and finance and get what we believe to be a pretty darn good core river project. When we talk about the master plan, it doesn't do all the stuff in the master plan, and it's not intended to. It's about restoration of the primary river channel and enhancements in the downtown area, but it's specific to the primary channel and doesn't go beyond that. So that's kind of where those came from. Like I say, ultimately, you have to decide when you want to go out first and at what level you want to go out and what you can do with that. But it's just almost impossible for us to give you a bunch of projects and say they will cost exactly this until they're fully designed. We have an estimate, and we know we can even do an estimate on full design, and then when you bid, it can still be different depending on the climate. So
we know that.
So it is a bit of a shot in the dark, but I would tell you, and I'm not suggesting that you necessarily hit the 9.35 million mark. I'm saying you could do that easily. You could mark off some of these and just do it with streets if you wanted to, and still not feel like you're totally where you want to be with streets.
See, I don't feel totally secure just about extending the 0.4%. There's a large portion of the population out there that thinks that every time a sales tax is passed, special sales tax, that it is permanent. It's never going away. And, back in 2009, when this sales tax took effect, it was probably billed, I can't remember exactly, but as a way to pay for Kenwood Cove, predominantly.
Well, it wasn't it?
Kenwood Cove was called out, but it was the strong emphasis on streets in Kenwood Cove. And,
But streets
and again, what you saw in the ballot language, you saw in the educational information. It didn't just highlight one piece; it highlighted all of it.
But there are good ways to spend the money, of course. And back at that particular time, we did a good education process because it passed by a sizable margin. What I'm thinking this time is that I think we can make a good case for the continuing the sales tax and adding a small amount to it. But I do think that we need to make it a very strong case for continuing our maintenance and repair of our residential streets. And by essentially doubling the amount of money on an annual basis, I think that sends a strong message to the population that we are serious about spending money on our streets, rehabbing and replacing as needed. That would be the $3.2
Well,
million.
I thought you made a good point last week, Commissioner Hardy, when you mentioned when people come from all around to Salina to do shopping and all, they're helping pay for that.
Correct.
They're helping pay that tax.
Yeah, a sizable
Which
amount.
a property tax is that's why that's hated so much, because it's just property owners. So
It's just a matter of being able to meet the need. If we have a need that has to be met or should be met, I think it's prudent to consider the sales tax because it is a tax that is shared by many people outside of the Salina city limits.
What would be the guess on how many, we have a list of all these other different communities and with a range of different sales tax rates and mill levies and everything else. From a best practices standpoint, and going to one of the questions that Commissioner Hardy has, how many of those communities do you think have no special sales tax at all on anything?
Well, it's hard to know.
I mean, would the number be very few? I mean, that would be my guess.
Yeah, and when you say special, do you mean like a CID or transportation?
Well, no, that
development
would
district?
just say all we have is our base sales tax.
Oh, I
our
see.
Property
General
tax, and we don't
versus-
do any special. We don't have any projects, or we're trying to raise any revenue through any other source.
I think there's I don't have it in front of me, but I believe there's a cap on the general, and I think you have more flexibility with the special. And I'm guessing that most of those communities, and that's a guess, but that most of them have a special with the specific emphasis that we have, which is primarily on capital improvements. But I really don't know if we would know without checking with
What's the
them.
cap on the local sales tax? I mean, if our sales tax rate is, what?
I don't know.
What
I'd have
is
to
that
check the
cap? I mean, are
statute.
we
I
at
think
the
there are
cap?
I don't know.
I think there are communities without any sales tax, too.
but that's what he just asked.
Yeah,
Well, right.
Without any
Well-
sales tax at all?
without any at all.
I'm not aware of any, unless
Just
they're like a little
just
town
the
about
state
that
sales
big.
tax. I'm wondering if some of the very smallest of the communities might not have a sales tax.
Well, that's possible. They're not communities, I mean, they're not of any size, consequential size at all.
Mhm.
Yeah.
May not
I'm
be.
not-
Well, I
I'm
mean,
not
it
aware
would
of
be
any.
on this, and I was just speaking to the list that we're kind of doing
Yeah,
comparables.
and
with.
even if there are communities that don't have any, they're going to probably have a county sales tax, and maybe they
Yeah.
have a relationship
Right.
there for.
Well, I'm
road
just saying that if you're looking at Abilene and it's 9.1, it's obviously, they obviously have special sales tax on a few things here or there.
I would presume so, yeah.
And all I'm saying is that we're near the bottom of that list at 8.4. And so depending on what our cap is and what other communities' caps are, and if they're capped out.
Yeah, and the 8.4 is all sales tax, includes the general, the special, and all that put
Right.
together, yeah.
Okay, any further questions of staff, or maybe I should ask any further questions, staff or the commission?
Yeah, we need to know what your consensus is for this.
Okay. That's what I was figuring. Should
Yeah.
we do like last week and hear public comment if there is any?
Yeah, I think that's
before we
fine.
hit that part. Okay, well, at this point, if we have any public comment at this time, we'll go ahead and hear it. We appreciate everybody sticking around for this.
Hi, my name is Jane Anderson. I live at 636 East Iron Avenue. First, I'd like to say thank you that you are considering the river and that you consider it part of the infrastructure of Salina. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. And I would also like to state that I feel, this is just my own personal opinion, not the river, the foundations, that I would just ask you to be careful about how much you are adding. I think it's a very conservative community. They're going to be mad that you're raising it. And I do think, I agree with Randy that a 0.25 is much more, sounds better than a 0.35. You are heading toward doubling, and I think that's, I personally feel that could be very dangerous. I know that you all want better streets, so do I. I hope that you all want a river as much as I do, and that we just want a yes vote. And that becomes the critical thing here to get better streets. Maybe you're not going to have the biggest pot that you wish for, but at least you'd have a pot to pull from. And so I'm hoping that you will consider and be careful in this next step, because I think that's really critical for the public's perception. I don't think they're going to look at what other communities are doing. I just don't think they'll look at it that way. I think they'll look at their own personal life and what it is here, and they'll think it's a lot no matter what you ask. But I think it's a really important project that we move this community forward. So thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. No more public comment. Any thoughts on? You want to go ahead? Do you have a list of, and we can knock off a list?
Well, I think last time you covered quite a lot of it. If you're still where you were last week, you were really looking at and I'd like to come back to it, but a spring of this year mail-in ballot special election. So that may be something you want to hit again. You did agree on the 20-year increment with the presumption that you may have a large enough project you finance over 20 years and want to match the timeline. And again, you agreed that the continuation of the current tax and enhancement is needed to meet future needs. So that's what we had last time. I think when we think about the timeline, again, it goes back to when you would like to ask the question of the public, because if it is this spring sometime, that gives us a very, very aggressive timeline for us to prep for. And what that means is I would need to get the formal question in front of you for authorization so I could give that to the county clerk as soon as possible in the next week or two. Because there's, like I said, he needs about 90 days to prep. If your desire is not to do it this spring, we have more time. None of the answers are really that pressing at this point in time. Because the next opportunity, unless you wanted to throw a special in between spring and fall, which I doubt you would, it would be the federal general election in this fall. That'd be your next opportunity. So,
What cost considerations for a mail-in versus the fall? Is there a cost associated with the fall?
The fall, no, it would not be a cost of the fall.
And so, where would the roughly $40,000 come from?
Well, it'd come from
general
the general
fund.
fund. Yeah.
And the turnout, the only thing we have is the school board right now with a turnout of about 50%, which was a big issue.
Mm-hmm. It's much better than what your typical spring election would be, but as we know, you won't have a spring election again based on legislative changes. You'll have a fall at some point. Since we don't have an election in 16, it's not a big deal, but at some point you'll decide if you want to be fall of even or odd number years.
Okay, timing. So let's click off timing-wise. Where?
I like to have the question segregated from the general election, I think. I think the educational process would be more difficult as late summer approaches, and that the other part of the equation is I don't know that the situation in the state is going to become even any better between now and November, and I think that that might also be a detriment to any kind of economic process or educational process we want to take to the public.
I agree with those assumptions, and I think too the distraction of the later date. I mean, we kind of got a challenge before us to get the information out there to explain our position to the public by the May time. But if we're going to be effective at it, I think we can do it in that much time. And having 50% to me is, of people that are interested in this particular question, is just as positive as the slightly higher turnout you get with the general election time.
Yeah, I think it'd be useful to do it before the state raises the state sales tax any further. Put the pressure on the state representatives to.
We don't know what the future will hold, but in my opinion,
They're not going to lower it.
that's a
That's for sure.
situation that might poison all requests for sales tax
Yeah, and
for some time.
it's early to presume what the state would do during election year. They don't like to raise anything, but if they don't, they're going to have to cut something. But we do know they borrowed from the Bank of KDOT, so I don't know how close that will get them to balancing their budget. But I know they're trying to do everything they can not to look at raising anything, just simply because that's pretty typical of an election year.
The one nice thing about our local sales tax, I think, is that I think we are held more accountable, perhaps, and the public in Salina will know that the money is going to be spent for specific areas, if not a specific list of projects. And they know that this sales tax, special sales tax, will be used to make the streets, keep them in a better shape than we would ordinarily, and work on a lot of other types of projects that are beneficial to the city, and specifically.
Well, I can remember when I voted for this tax the prior time, and what was attractive to me is that it looked back and took care of the infrastructure that we needed to, but it also looked forward to the kind of things we talk about in the comprehensive plan about making our city more attractive to young people and having more vitality. Those are the kind of concepts in the plan are illustrated in the long list of capital improvement projects we've got, whether they're on the 5-year or the unrealized and unfunded. So I think part of the message to the public should be to help them understand. I mean, one, we have to justify what we're asking for, but if they can understand that this vision is to improve the community and enhance it, I think that they'll react positively to that.
But, I voted for that sales tax as well, but I also remember thinking this is a temporary tax.
Mm-hmm.
And if the norm is going to be to extend this ad infinitum, probably going to need to come up with some name other than special sales tax, maybe auxiliary sales tax, because, it just becomes part of, we're basically running part of our operation off of the special sales tax. So it's what would have been accomplished by raising property tax, except we're asking other folks to pay for a third of it.
Well, that might be a good idea. I can't believe that the cost of funding any other city's much different than ours. So when we're in the lower tier for sales taxes, when we're in the lower tier for property taxes, when our bonding is less than most of the communities, I've got to wonder if we're not keeping up with how cities do business now. So we have to applaud ourselves for being frugal, I guess, and getting as much from our dollar as we have, but the environment of how cities acquire their revenues has changed.
Mm-hmm.
Depends also on what their assessed value is, too. Some of them don't probably need as high a rate just because they're taxing
everybody's
much
got a
huger,
different
much
scenario.
larger tax base.
But if we're putting a larger emphasis on economic development in the next decade, we need to back that up with quality of life services, with better streets and better housing options and all of that sort of thing. We're going to be doing a lot of projects in the next decade related to downtown, the core, that may include some projects that we're not even aware of that could benefit by having some of this money available. So I think it's essential, frankly, if we're going to compete with the surrounding communities, to have a city that has a lot going for it. And I think this continuation of the sales tax, the special sales tax, would move us in that direction.
So was the consensus kind of mail-in then?
I think so.
Okay. I kind of tend to like 63 and 65% participation. And the participation is the part that is really important to me. But if for whatever reason we could get 65, if there's 65% participate by mail-in, which maybe the second time around on a mail-in ballot that might happen, or better. I don't think, it looks like 63 anymore over the last 4 or 5 different presidential elections has been about the number. So I don't think it's going to be more than 63. So I guess there might be a potential for more people voting by mail-in as more people get used to that process. So
I think there's a possibility. And again, I think the importance of the question may have something to do with that because, again, you had a different school district, not ours, that was with the general election, and it was for raising taxes for, I believe, a bond for capital improvements, and they had at least a 50% turnout, and the question did that because it was a huge no, is what that was. But I think the question itself can have a big effect on what your turnout is, as well as the means that you ask.
Mm-hmm.
One thing too, when we're thinking about the increment in the number, I was looking at the 0.25 estimated at 8 million. That is again 3.1 million estimated more than what you would we'd expect to have in, say, 2017. When you're talking about quality of life and a lot of things, and you're talking about streets and balancing that, I ran some quick math on that, but I can't fathom doing less than 2 million. You can, but I can't really fathom doing less than 2 million for streets, neighborhood streets, however you want to do that. That only leaves 1.1 million left for absent what we do today, typically for additional things. So that's something to think about as well, because when you look at all of the things on the list, you're going to start parsing them down, and you may not be able to do some of the things that you want to do with that. So that's where that increment is. It's really about what do you really want to do, because you'll put yourself in a position if you start, you may have a priority today, but you may not, depending on if you're on the governing body later, you may not get to choose to keep it. And so you could say we want to do 2 million in streets, but you can't do some of the other things. So what do? You bring streets down to 1.5 or 1, and you kind of have a commitment out there, even though it's not legal, it's a practical commitment. So if you go with the quarter, you've got 3.1 extra. If you do 2 for streets, you're down to 1.1, which doesn't get you a river project if the number is close, and doesn't get you that and or any other enhancements, like if you need it for economic development, if you need it for comp plan improvements to a complete or an impact street or something like that, you're gonna start to be tighter than you think you might be.
Mm-hmm.
Just something to think about as you think about what you really want to do in your community.
Okay.
Just one, it's a slightly unrelated question. Is the city commission and the city itself is limited in how much it can advocate for this? We're limited to only giving educational information to the residents about what the tax would do, but not in a way that would suggest we urge you to vote for it.
Typically, Greg can give you the details, but typically our role is, because of your elected role and my role as a staff and the rest of our staff, is to educate. It's not to, and it's fairly broad. I mean, you can list the projects, you can talk about potential community impact, what they would cost, and so forth. It's fairly broad, but when it comes to saying, please vote for this, or that's where the line is usually at. And with this type of issue, I'd defer to Greg on expanding on that.
I think Mr. Gage stated it well, that line between education and advocacy is something I haven't had occasion to look at. We can look again if there are any more specific direction as a matter of law, but I think Mr. Gage described it well.
We can encourage just turnout in general. Please go vote, whatever you're going to vote. It's up to you, but please turn out and use your right to do that. We can do that.
Well, I know that, at least I think the reason that the Board of Education got their bonding through like they did was they did a great job I thought, on education, what that was going to be used for. And that's what I mean. I think we're going to have to let the public know that for sure, because that'll pique their interest in either one way or another. So we might as well. And I think if we wait until the general election, I it's already getting to me to turn on the TV or the radio and hear all those. I mean, by the end of this year, it's really going to be negative. So I think we ought to do it in May or as soon as we can, and we'll just have to work on the education part.
Okay.
So increments what we need, and what if we get that, I think I can bring back a question for you, even a draft question for you to look at. But we'll need to get to a formal vote on the question fairly soon. But I can at least begin drafting that.
Did we at least move the scale 0.35 to 0.25?
That's up to you, to you five.
I mean,
No.
it was 0.25 to 0.4.
Well, there's .3 sitting in the middle. 8.7 million would protect all those big projects. In fact, it would put the full 3.6 million in streets, the full money for the river, full for economic, ready to give full money for economic development.
At 8 point
well,
what?
Yeah,
Well, it would end up being, we're at 8.4 now, it would end up being 8.7. If the increment is 0.3.
right. My thought is this: if the increment was 0.3 and the line is there because it says that kind of funds what you wanted, I kind of like to know at 0.3 or even at 0.25 what doesn't that fund, and go through that list at that time and pare it down in that process versus just picking a list without having any idea where you're gonna.
Well, he gave us, I mean,
Well, I went back and you know, if you get full amount for streets, the only thing that I took out, I dropped property tax stabilization, 800,000, full amount for parks, full for economic development, and the only other hit was on capital projects, which came down to 1.5 million. All the others were funded at the top amount.
and what was the percentage?
Well, it came to 8,750,000, and the closest one to that is 0.3.
0.3. I'm good with 0.3.
I can live with .3. I was the guy that liked .4, but
Well, yeah,
psychology of it. So.
Well, I kind of think we need to make it 0.4, but whatever you all want to do, that's fine.
I could go with a .3. You know, this is pretty important stuff we're talking about, and you know,
Well, I think that here's the thing that I think we can't lose track of too is we got more than one. By going early, we get more than one ask. If the 0.3 isn't right, then
Yeah, that's
and
true.
the feedback we get from that is we'll get feedback from it, and we'll know at that time whether our priorities are not meshing with the voter or whether the rate isn't meshing. And
Of course, on the other side, only you can't do the second time around is raise it.
Yeah,
well,
that's,
right,
that's,
and that's
that's
what I'm
the
saying
whole
is
thing.
that
You can't raise it.
yeah, I mean,
So-
and then if you do it at 0.25 and it doesn't, then you got then you're at your base rate of 0.4, and hopefully that gets through. Otherwise, then you got a whole lot of in that instance, then the property tax does go up.
I think we should
So-
do 0.4.
it'd be 8.7 total.
Yeah.
That'd
So-
still keep us below.
I think those three
So
down
that's
there
the,
wanna go
I mean,
that
that's the rub, is that, yeah, you can do it without even reapproving the 0.4, but the revenue's gonna have to come from somewhere, so.
Mhm. Yeah, it's about what you and what the rest of the community wants their community to look like and feel like, and the things that they want. Do they want nice parks and good streets and some of those needs, and the same quality level that they might see in other communities they visit? And if they do, you'd probably see support for that. But it doesn't mean you will. You might find that it's just they feel like the tax is too high, and they're okay compromising some of that, and that's okay too. It's really about what a community wants. And I always tell people this when you hear the rhetoric down the highway at Topeka. It's the tax in and of itself is not bad. It's about, can you afford to pay it, and do you get what you want out of it as a citizen in a community? And every community is different. That's why some are higher taxed and some are lower taxed. It's about finding the sweet spot for your community and meeting your needs.
And what 9 million buys today is not going to buy 20 years from now, or even 15 years from now, I don't think.
Although
So-
that number should go up somewhat with that
Yeah, I mean, I would
inflation.
think you'd see somewhere around 2.5% to 3% growth on average. It'll dip a little during a recession, and it'll come out of it, but somewhere in that range based on historical growth.
Well, can we look at mail-in 0.25 to 0.3 and seeing what each one of those does? But it sounds like 0.3.
When you say see what each of those does, what do you mean?
Yeah, what do you mean?
Well, just in that, Dr. Davis laid out, you take this out, you take that out, you take what you have to take out to get to those.
Yeah, if you're in the 0.25, again, based on these assumptions, you're at 8 million, that's 3.1 million. If you put 2 million to streets, you're at 1.1 million.
Yeah.
You're already under a presumed increment for a river project, let alone economic development and parks and some of those other things. So you would already have to start peeling things away from what you may find are community priorities later if you
We're
do
gonna
that.
need
And I'm
more
not
than
saying it should be higher. I'm just saying if you just base it on the current needs and possible future needs, you're gonna get into those some.
Yeah. Well, I still see the line at 0.35, so 0.3 to me seems like,
Well, let's go for the 0.3 then.
okay.
Well, we wouldn't be any higher than
Can
that.
I say 3.5?
Well, yeah, I think we need to have more than that, but then
I
we'll.
see the line there, I know what you're
Go.
saying.
Commissioners, what we
I
can
know
do
what you're saying,
too
I see
is
the line at 0.35 and,
we can,
Well,
if you're still
and
kind of
we-
deciding between, sounds like between 0.25, 0.3, 0.35, and 0.4. I can make this a little simpler for you. We can go ahead and draft the ordinance language and mess with that, and then we can leave a blank as a good recommendation from your deputy city manager. I think a lot of times we don't like to do ordinance changes on the fly, but that's a pretty easy one. If that's the only blank, that's pretty easy for us. So I think we can probably do that. And we're 2 weeks out from the next regular meeting. That puts us into really towards the end of the month. So we're into probably late May, getting into mid to late May at that point in time. So I'll take a look at the timing, talk with the county clerk again, make sure we're on the same page with timing. My hope is that we would bring back to you an action item for this at your next regular meeting. If I feel we have to accelerate it to kind of meet a time frame, which would be before school's out, I think, in May, I'll find that out, and we can always schedule a special meeting if necessary,
okay,
just for that.
okay.
There is a ceiling when it comes to
All right, so
asking.
are we ready to move on to the next item?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, thank you.
we'll do that then. Some people here have a ball game they want to watch.
Item
I've
seven.
been told.
7.5, resolution number 16-7312, authorizing the mayor to execute a real estate contract with Charles Monroe Arnold III in order to acquire property as part of the proposed downtown field house project.
Hey, Mr. Hardesty, once again.
Hello, Mayor and Commissioners, again. This resolution would be another step in the downtown fieldhouse project. It would be the third of 3 properties that would be owned by the city that would cover the site plan for the proposed fieldhouse in that 5th and Ash area. During the negotiations with Mr. Arnold, we came up with an offer that was agreed upon that had $47,000 in compensation for the purchase of the property and $5,000 allocated for relocation assistance. In addition, we're proposing a rent-free lease running through March 1st so Mr. Arnold can finish up his business and find suitable place to move. We did do a Phase 1 environmental site assessment. Findings of that, based on those findings, we do not see the need to do a Phase 2 site assessment at this site. Several options for you to consider. One would be to approve the resolution. 2 would be to not approve the resolution, and 3 would be to provide additional direction. Stand for questions at this time.
Okay, any questions for staff at this time?
Was this site a gas station at one point?
I believe so.
Do you know if there are any underground tanks?
That's the Phase 1 site assessment. I know at least one tank has been removed from there. Can't guarantee, but we're assuming that all the tanks have been removed from that area.
No way to know.
I'm sorry?
There's no way to know if all of the tanks have
The
been
Phase
removed.
1 site assessment does several probes into the area, looks into the past history. From, like I say, from that study, from those findings, we We do not believe there's another tank underneath there. There is a process if we do find a tank with KDHE that we've already touched upon so that we know what to do if we do unearth another tank. But we do not believe there's a tank under there.
Yeah, what they found, they were removed and it's been closed out. So KDHE did not believe there would be any other tanks. Now, sometimes you still run into stuff you don't expect, but based on what they know and the process they used, there should not be any tanks.
Okay.
Other questions?
And with this property, that's the entire property acquisition. I mean, that's every piece of property other than Insurance Partners. That's all the property on that block.
Yeah, as it relates to all the property on the block that would need to be acquired, it would
So it's
include it all.
It's the original Fieldhouse property, the corner of the Arnold's, veneers that we did earlier that we got the gift for, and then the only other parcel on there is the city already owns the parking and
Yes.
and all that. So, okay. All right. Any public comment on this at this time?
We outlasted everybody.
Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back for action.
Mr. Mayor, move approval of resolution number 16-7312, authorizing the mayor to execute a real estate contract with Charles Monroe Arnold III in order to acquire property as part of the proposed downtown Fieldhouse project. Would you like the amount added in?
That's fine where you are.
All righty.
It's in the resolution.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion to second to approve resolution number 16-7312, authorizing the mayor to execute a real estate contract with Charles Monroe Arnold III in order to acquire property as part of the proposed downtown Fieldhouse project. Any further discussion at this time? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries 5-0. Do we have any other business other than a request for a special executive session?
Mayor, if I may, I'm sorry, Mayor and Commissioners, I just noted I had opportunity to review the resolution, but failed to note at the time, there is the matter of the short-term lease that we should probably have your formal authorization for the mayor to sign. That was an arrangement, Mr. Hardesty may wish to speak to it, but that was in consideration for the owner's ability to remain on site, complete his relocation process, remain in possession of the property, continuing to be responsible for any insurance coverages on the property during that interim period, but to provide that additional time for the transition.
Okay.
So,
Is that language not included in the resolution?
It's in the lease agreement, I think, or the purchase agreement.
yeah, the purchase agreement anticipates it, and I'm sorry, the resolution itself speaks of executing the contract of sale.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, it does not refer specifically
Okay.
to the lease, and we should probably have you do that.
Well, can you just would he then just be able to then make a motion to authorize the mayor to?
That's correct.
Okay. So the motion would be to authorize the mayor to execute the lease agreement with Charles Arnold III?
Correct.
Okay.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries 5-0. Okay. Other business?
Mr. Mayor, I move that to recess into executive session for 45 minutes to discuss with legal counsel matters subject to the attorney-client privilege for the reason that public discussion of those matters would waive the privilege and adversely affect the city's interest in the matters, and for the purpose of discussing matters pertaining to non-elected city personnel for the reason that public discussion of the matter would violate the privacy rights of the non-elected personnel involved, and reconvene at 6:45 p.m.
Second.
I might consider an amendment to that and amend it to 30 minutes instead of 45 if anybody else, because
Yeah,
I
we're
think-
just guesstimating, so whatever you think you
Okay,
you
because
need is fine.
I know that people are on a schedule, but also I do know that we will be taking care of part of this on the 25th as well. So we may, if you want to take 30 minutes now, we may be able to get it done in 30 minutes.
I would withdraw the motion and restate it with 30 minutes, and that would be 6:30.
I'll second that.
Okay. So I have a motion and a second to, you want to make that 6:35?
Yeah,
Thirty.
because
Okay.
that's
6:30.
Well, motion and a second
6:05,
to
yeah.
recess into executive session for 30 minutes and reconvene at 6:35. And no business after?
No business.
No business after this. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. We're in executive session.